yourself, man. Think you're better than me.
I am better than you.
You're an ignorant fool.
That's just who you are. You're a fuck up. I don't care.
Okay,
Whatever.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
give a shit.
You shouldn't give a shit. Who gives a shit? I definitely don't give a shit.
In the old age tale, David beats Goliath because he hits him right where he needs to. Hi, my name is Nacho, welcome back to the channel. So now the House of the Dragons and Rings of Power both ended, it's open season to compare them both. Now one thing I'll do, I'll try to compare only what we see in the screen, because if I try to get book accurate, this video will last 3 hours and I'll go insane. Also because the author of one of the books is dead and the other one just really likes money and doesn't work on his books, so it wouldn't be fair. So I'll tackle only what we see on the screens and point out what I think made one show revive its beaten down franchise and made the other one just drop a large stinking poop in theirs. Now both fighters are in the ring, let's get to it.
Get me the meat.
Time to get it wet.
First, let's take a step back and look at this from afar. Both Rings of Power and House of the Dragon are set in a fantasy world in what can be considered medieval times where magic and mystical creatures like gigantic spiders and dragons are a thing. Both worlds have very defined locations and factions that interact with each other in one way or another and create the history we see. The main difference we get from the start is that House of the Dragon has a story that has not been told before and in a way leads to the events of Game of Thrones. This time we get a look of a Westeros that is rather peaceful and rather prosperous under Targaryen ruling, and we are introduced to a whole new array of characters where the only familiar names are those of the houses, historical figures and locations. So it's easier for us to accept these characters and get to know them because there is no precedent of them. And if you haven't read the books, they are basically new to you and you want to see what happens next. This is the first problem that Rings of Power faces. Elves in Tolkien's work have very long lives, so a few characters we meet in the original trilogy are still alive in the prequel, and that creates a problem when a creator reimagines them and a new actor portrays them. Because unfortunately for McKay and the other dude, can't remember his name, Payne, that's the one, I just had to remember what the show made me feel. Right, unfortunately for them, PJ did a pretty good job with Lord of the Rings, so the standard was set pretty high, which is one of the reasons why The Hobbit fell short, because there was tampering with PJ's process that made the first movie so successful. And similar to House of the Dragon, this story takes place years before the original trilogy, during a time that's not very developed, but with characters we were already familiar with. So when Monkey 1 and 2 took it upon themselves to give Galadriel a new identity, not as a beautiful, tall and regal lady of the elves that also happens to be one of the most powerful sorcerers in the world, but as a mere soldier that commands, I wouldn't even say an army, it's more like a platoon or a squad, with a blatant disregard for authority and a determination to get what she wants without considering the consequences, and then trying to justify this as a character arc, even though at this point she's a couple thousand years old, the result is a contradiction in the viewer's mind that already has an idea of what to expect from a character. And because Gal is said to be the main character, it creates a poor foundation for the rest of the story. Similar is the case with Elrond, Gandalf, Sauron, Gil-galad, Celebrimbor, Elendil, Isildur, but I think you get the point. Another important thing in order to tell a cohesive story is cohesion. Being able to set a chain of events, even generally, is paramount for any show to succeed. And in the case of Rings of Power, this particular detail is overlooked. My favorite example of this is the Watchtower trap. So if you haven't watched the show, don't, watch my reviews instead. Arondir and Browning get cornered in an elven watchtower by the orc army and they are doomed to die in days if not hours, which is vague enough to begin with. But they hatch a plan that consists basically in dropping a very sturdy looking tower on the orcs. In the next episode, Arondir drops the very sturdy looking tower that was being held by a single rope on the orcs, killing what looks to be a bunch of them. But Nacho, you may ask, didn't you say that the people of the south were trapped in the tower as well? Well no, they escaped through the back door and gained solid ground on the orcs. In fact, they got in front of them. And my problem is that they did this between episodes. None of this is shown or explained, and we just have to roll with it, which basically nullifies any tension that was built in the previous episode. House of the Dragon is pretty consistent with its storytelling despite having multiple time skips. This is particularly exemplified with Viserys' sickness progressing through the show and the effect it has on its family, or Lucerys cutting Aemon's eye when they were kids and then him asking to cut his own out later in the season finale, which can be interpreted as resentment. That creates order in your brain because they call back to previous events constantly, instead of leaving blanks that ruin the show's continuity. Finally, both shows have somewhat of a slower pace. House of the Dragon spends a lot of time building political tension that leads up to the climax of the season finale that sets off the war, but Rings of Power on the other hand finds itself stalling the main plot given all the extra stuff they put in the show. The entire history line of the Harfoots, made-up sister and unimportant boyfriends, Lothar, Isildur's Daydream of the West, everything feels like a filler up until something big happens like Aedir's plan coming to fruition with the eruption of Mount Doom, which means journalists can have a payday with articles like this. No one even thinks about rings up until the last episode. It just happened. It's like Monday's homework that you tell your mom on Sunday night. And with both these shows being prequels, you can already see why one of them did well and the other one didn't. But let's dig a little deeper. I'd say that any good story is only as good as the characters make it to be. Nothing happens just because, and a good character can even make milk interesting. And interesting or well-made characters can help us connect and immerse in whatever story they are involved in. Make a character mysterious and our human curiosity will force us to know what they are up to. Make them shallow or boring and we'll reject them because for that we got ourselves. I'm just kidding. So because both shows are very rich in characters, I'll narrow it down to two easy ones to compare, our main Gal Galadriel and Daemon. Let's start with our boy, Daemon. From episode 1 we get that he's a very ambitious, aggressive, talented and charismatic fighter and leader, but we also see him having a sort of devotion and love for his family, that sometimes he shits on because he does whatever he wants, but in the end, and as the season progresses, we see how protective he is of his brother and niece several times. And there's a certain vulnerability to him, because he's human after all. When his brother died, he gets outraged. When his son and his wife die in child labor, he's heartbroken. And Matt Smith does a great job showing that across the screen as the veteran actor he is. And as a personal note, I appreciate the tonality he uses, and that's a given by the nature of Game of Thrones itself. If you have seen any of my previous videos, you'll know that I tend to swear more than an alcoholic southern truck driver with Tourette's. So when something happens and Daemon goes,
I would rather feed my sons to the dragons than have them carry shields and caps for your drunken usurper cunt of a king.
Aegon Targaryen.
I just can't help to find that appealing. Now while looking at Morfydd Clark, I believe that this was her first leading role, which sucks for her because the character of Galadriel, as I mentioned, was made to be incredibly unappealing. She's a talented fighter, but that's only displayed in a vacuum given that the squad she commands is borderline useless, and when faced with any other adversary she either takes them down with ease or completely evaporates them with a single swing. She takes no for an answer, which could be seen as a strength, except for the fact that her not listening to anyone basically leads to Halbrand becoming Sauron after he clearly took a sabbatical from being the Lord of Darkness. That was all her, from the moment she stepped on the raft. And having her at the center of the story, again, makes it very hard to relate to. The lack of expression on her face also adds to that. Now in the case of Rings of Power, there's also a parallel set of characters that don't tie up to the main story, which I'll quickly touch on despite their irrelevance, which are the Harfoots that are only here to serve as a nostalgia trip to the original trilogy, same reason why they felt they had to give Gandalf, Mithril, Mordor and the Ringwraiths an origin story. They, I mean the showrunners, had to insert themselves in the lore as much as possible. This was an ego project.
From the beginning, we knew she couldn't do this alone. Every good quest needs a fellowship.
Well, that's the thing, this one doesn't, because all the Harfoots accomplish in this is to extend the runtime of the show, cut them out entirely, and we lose nothing. We can even get a more cohesive story because we are not constantly jumping off the main one, and you can actually focus on developing your actual main characters. But that's not a thing they do because they had the money, and oh boy did they have the money. That's not the problem. The problem is we are not trying to make a show here, we are trying to create a legacy. But we'll come back to that. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. I'll say this first, I'm a millennial Latin American man. I don't really give a fuck about representations in films or TV. I grew up watching Dragon Ball and I'm like that meme that we see nowadays, literally me. So when the big push for having more women and people of color to appear on TV, I was like, we didn't have women or people of color before? Okay, by all means, go for it. The results of that speak for themselves. One of my favorite characters from Game of Thrones was Oberyn Martell, and we all know how that ended. A valuable lesson was learned there, but I didn't like him because Pedro Pascal is also Latino. No, in fact, I didn't know he was from Chile until way after the show ended. I liked the character because he portrayed it marvelously. He was cool, he was strong, he was fearless, he went up against the mountain and almost won. But if I follow Hollywood's logic, my favorite character in Rings of Power should be Arondir. Ismael Cordova is also Latino, but that's not the case. That's far from being the truth. When it comes to Rings of Power, I have characters that I dislike less, which is something I could say about Isildur up until episode 6 until they completely 180 him, and that's about it. And when it comes to House of the Dragon, the closest thing I can find as representation is Fabian Frankel as Kristen Cole, but he's British.
It's Tuesday, innit?
So again, following their logic, I should storm the gates of House of the Dragon Twitter and glue myself to one of the posts demanding a recast. But because I am a logical human being, I won't be doing that, because I don't need to. The characters are good. I don't care how the person looks like, I care about them doing their job. That applies to everyone, and I feel like the work they did in House of the Dragon was fantastic, in terms of writing, casting, directing, acting. I'm not even gonna mention the writing in Rings of Power.
Stone sees only downward.
Are you high?
If all those things are in check, I don't care if the character looks like me, I'm gonna wanna be like them. Probably not specifically like them, the characters of Game of Thrones are pretty fucked up. House Velaryon being black, getting some backlash. But the thing I see is that they are all black. They have Valyrian blood that gives them that characteristic silver hair. So in that scene where they all walk in, you can recognize them as a unified house. It's not that one's black, the other one's lighter color. Let's sprinkle some Puerto Ricans in there. No, they're black. Their kids are black. They're a naval family, so they hang out in the sun a lot. There's cohesion in there. The showrunners said they chose to make the characters black with the purpose of differentiate them from the Targaryens and other Valyrian families. And it's a valid reason. They also uttered the dreaded phrase, "The world has changed a lot since 2011, which I don't find to be a valid reason, especially if you're adapting something. But they are well performed. The character of Baemon Velaryon going off on Rhaenyra before Daemon killed him was such a good scene, so I don't mind because they casted good actors. Now by saying that, I believe that if you cast people to fill a diversity box and not cast the best person for the role, you're engaging in a racist practice, which is what Rings of Power did. That thing where we auditioned over 1,000 people is bullshit. If that were true, how do you end up with Theo and Disa?
It went on for a long, long time. We saw hundreds of people for each role, so thousands hours in total.
Thousands, yeah.
I do not believe you.
Now, women. I'm gonna step on all the eggshells here, because I honestly don't give a fuck. Like I said before, I can't pinpoint the moment the hardcore remake everything with women in them began. I remember someone giving a speech at the Oscars, but I can't remember who or when, because I don't really watch that shit. But another flag was raised when both these shows got announced and there was a clear focus on their female characters. The initial trailers showing Galadriel in a plate of armor leading her troops and young Rhaenyra being appointed heir and having that whole woman in power combo with Rhaenys. So people started saying, oh damn, this is just gonna be another message of women should make more decisions, why not women fighters, modern audiences, men are toxic, etc. Now one show took a very on-the-nose approach, giving, yes, women positions of power or influence, but also giving them an appropriate feminine air to them. Now that could be my point of view of what I think feminine is, but I feel like in the case of Rhaenyra and Alicent, they are huge players in the game without losing that maternal instinct or the want to protect their kids and their families while still having to make decisions that would most likely endanger them. Alicent standing in front of Aegon when Rhaenys comes out of the dragon pit, Rhaenyra rejecting Cole for her crown duties and driving him into losing his mind basically. They are mothers, they show emotion, they are somewhat fragile and need rescuing from time to time. They subdue themselves to their royal duties at the order of their male counterparts without losing sight of their objectives, but they are also firm when they need to be. They are complex characters and you can relate to them. Harder for me of course because I can't physically be a mother, but I can imagine in my head what it would feel like if my son got chomped off by the enemy's dragon. And then Rings of Power. The problem I think most writers are facing is that they are confusing strong women with men. Galadriel, however good of a fighter she is, shouldn't be able to take on that many guards unscathed. That would only mean that those, I wanna hope, highly trained guards who are in charge of protecting a high-end politician of Numenor are the weakest of the realms, or Galadriel is that much overpowered. It took the whole fellowship to take down one cave troll, and Gal killed one ice troll without even breaking a sweat. All she missed was the teabag at the end. Other than the fact that the Galadriel we see has nothing to do with the Galadriel we know, putting her in such a position of power creates a huge discrepancy because it means that she's probably the most powerful elf in existence and shouldn't submit to anyone. I mean, if she can vaporize an orc with her sword while riding upside down, why hide when the orc patrol comes around? Why not usurp the Numenorian throne? What's stopping her? She knows she's stronger than them. Speaking of the Numenorians, Queen Regent Miriel. I looked this up. Queen Regent is the guardian of a child monarch and rules temporarily in the child's stead. Now a Queen Regnant, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, is the actual queen that has overall power over all of her territories. In the tradition of those times, any woman who raises as queen is either expected to have a male heir grown of age or to marry someone in order to give the kingdom a king. Miriel is never shown to have kids or having the intention to marry and willingly goes to battle in a foreign land while her father is bedridden. If they both die, which she came close to, I mean she literally survived a fucking volcano rolling over her, and only lost her sight when a little bit of ash hit her face, the kingdom of Numenor is without ruler. I mean Firesong would likely and happily take over that, but you know what I'm saying. In House of the Dragon, Rhaenyra is named heir and takes on the title of queen, having sons and Daemon as a husband, and Alicent names Aegon king as soon as Viserys dies. It makes sense. And since we're talking about gender, what about the men? If you ever thought that modern sexism is bad, medieval times make that look like nothing. Men are expected to grow to be strong, fight in wars, have children, die, and their sons to do the same. You try to go against that world order, and you most likely get executed. Same applies to women who go off their way. One thing that I love about House of the Dragon is when Rhaenys is talking to Corlys and mentions that Rhaenyra is the only one holding the rest of the council, made of men, from plunging the realm into a war, and her reasoning for that is that she doesn't want to be a queen of the ashes, nice callback to Game of Thrones, and she doesn't want her family to fight. She's trying to find a non-combative solution, which is not something a man would do. Daemon would have killed Otto the moment he stepped on that bridge. And that makes sense because they are men, they are hot-blooded, they want to fight, it brings honor to them. They are not smiling like idiots while marching to war, but they know that victory brings rewards and they don't retire after one fight.
More like a whole lifetime.
Fuck Ontamo, you're so fucking weak, bro. In Rings of Power, not a single decision gets made without a woman having a part of it. Not Durin deciding to mine the Mithril, not Halbrand or the Numenorians going to Middle-earth, not the forging of the fucking rings. All men lack conviction. Isildur wants to go west and gets kicked out of the navy for it, but in the presence of conflict he suddenly forgets all about that and pushes his father to let him go with them. And what's in the west? I don't know, fuck it, there's war happening. He suddenly wants to do something for his homeland. One episode before he only cared about his own quest. Why is Arondir a lieutenant for Browning and not the leader, being him the one that has the most combat knowledge and training? The undermining of men creates a problem because you need men to be strong, you need them to be leaders, you need them to make decisions. Men have a different approach towards problems, they respond to threats in a different way, and are naturally physically stronger than women. That doesn't mean they can't be defeated by women. You can have exceptions like Brienne of Tarth or the Sand Snakes. If you make men weaker than women, the imbalance that you so hardly fight against remains. You're only switching the roles. But let's move on. Now for a modern fantasy show, it's important to be able to sell the idea of the mystical. You don't necessarily have to respect the laws of nature, but you have to make sure that your magic and other stuff looks real and makes sense. In this case, I will give a point to Rings of Power for the amazing work they did in the panoramics of their cities. Numenor, Region, Khazad-dûm, Mount Doom, Eruption all look incredible, as well as some of the set pieces. However, the compliments end there. Because outside of those good things, there's a lot of lackluster things in this show. And for House of the Dragon to also have all those good looking visuals, as well as better looking fantasy creatures, a better sensation of crowds, fuller indoor spaces, better costume designs. I never thought I would be upset with a character having the same outfit 3 episodes in a row. The armor sets that I'm sure everyone hated in Rings of Power compared to the ones in House of the Dragon, a show that had a third of the budget per episode. There is no excuse. The Fellowship of the Ring has one of the best looking armies shown on the screen and had 19,000 costumes with up to 40 different versions of each costume design. In the first episode of House of the Dragon, we got the jousting tournament and we see so many different armors and they all look amazing, and then Daemon enters with the more fancy looking Targaryen armor and it looks so on theme and badass, and he changes them constantly as well as all the other characters all throughout the season. Also, having good costume design plays an even more important role because it paints a difference between houses, between both sides of the Civil War, and it's very strongly pointed in this scene.
The king will not be happy, right in the midst of his speech.
The beacon on the high tower. Do you know what color it glows when Old Town calls its banners to war?
Green.
Congratulations, stepdaughter. What a blessing this is for you.
I was pretty disappointed as well with the Numenorian navy. In one shot we see a super busy pier with lots of movement happening between the ships, and when we're ready to set to Middle Earth, 3 ships. Medium size, I'd say. which someone in the comments mentioned that most of the hull is underwater and that's how they can hold more stuff. Okay, so you're telling me that 3 ships can hold up to 400 soldiers with their horses, provisions, armor, the massive amount of tents we see during the retreat, the medical equipment, physicians. We see inside their ships. There's no room in there, brother. Stop lying to yourself. Now compare that, the ships in House of the Dragon. I could go on all day, but this is getting kinda long, so let's wrap it up with a cherry. I say that 90% of the reason why Rings of Power failed is not anything that happened in the show, but because of all the bullshit that came out of the mouths of some of the actors and the showrunners. To invest that much money on people hyping up your show with fake reviews, that god-awful superfans interview that wins the cringiest performance of the decade.
Like Sauron is hot, I feel like people will be like, I can fix him.
Very excited after watching that.
Which is better, House of the Dragon or Rings of Power? Well, I haven't watched Rings of Power yet because I'm going to binge it. I don't want to watch them both at the same time. And House of the Dragon started first, so I was already taken.
A lot of talking about my girl Galadriel.
Yeah, I've never hit a kid before.
Just to fuck it all up by having these 2 knuckleheads called the fans patently evil and a threat to democracy? It's poetic. It will go down in history as the biggest L of all times. Amazon deleting negative reviews in an attempt to pump up the IMDb scores. The fucking dumbasses again replying to an interview on why are certain things in the show that way with, oh, it's never mentioned in the books. Yes, you are right, you 5-year-old child. It doesn't say it in the book. That doesn't mean you can go and make shit up.
As Tolkienian a way as possible. Go back to the book, go back to the book, go back to the book.
Shut up!
Which is the reason why these 2 bozos are getting sidelined for season 2, which is a fancy word to say fired. Now House of the Dragon's not out of the woods because Steve Toussaint also kinda went up on Twitter with some of the fans' remarks, which I'll agree were kinda racist. But generally I do feel like they handled it better and they did put some thought on some of their decisions. So if the intention from the start was to have all of House of Valerian to be black, even the warriors, and you audition black actors, then yes, I guess you're doing the right thing. So when the fandom raises their voice, you don't call them racist, despite the fact that some of the things we're saying were pretty racist. You just explain your logic and let the good quality of the show do the rest. Don't add anything more to that. And don't ask established actors to read a script from their cars on Twitter, that's just cringe. Long story short, don't expect your show to do well if you under-deliver and then call out the fans for not liking it. So in the end, the show that's being praised is the one that provided the most entertainment. There's a difficulty added when dealing with adaptations for hardcore fans of the source material, but it's possible to appeal to them if the quality of your show is good, which House of the Dragon showed us to be possible. Everyone that liked it is excited for season 2, myself included. Rings of Power on the other hand has a lot of shit to handle before even attempting to release a season 2, which they have to at this point because they're pretty much in the shit if they don't. And it's gonna be so hard for them to turn this around. The fact that they bastardized the source material doesn't really help. And just think about it, after 4 years, no one forgot what happened to the last season of Game of Thrones. And that was after a successful 7-ish season run. Like I said in my first video about it, I wanna be wrong about this. I want to like the show. But if it's anything like the season we've got, expect me punching a lot more walls. But if you watched this far into the video, leave us a like. Thank you so much. This has been probably the longest video I've made. Let me know in the comments below what was your most and least favorite part of any of the shows. And as always, I've been Nacho. Hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.